Center for the Ethiopian Educational Information and Communication Technology presents Educational Satellite Television Programs.
Hello, teacher. Hello, students. Welcome to today's lesson on bacteria and disease. We studied bacteria and disease in our last lesson, comparing infectious diseases with functional diseases. We learned that infectious diseases are caused by microorganisms such as bacteria. These diseases can be spread directly or indirectly from one person to another. Infectious diseases typically show symptoms of illness, which are signs of the infection. Functional diseases are those that do not show any symptoms. The structure of an organ or system is not altered in a functional disease. Rather, the function of that system is changed. Today, we are going to discuss the reservoir of infection. We briefly talked about the reservoir of infection in our last lesson, but today, we are going to look at it in more detail. We will examine the roles of the reservoir hosts. We will also discuss the ways bacterial diseases are transmitted. Are you ready to begin the lesson, students? Let us get started. Previously, we learned that infectious diseases are caused by microorganisms, and they are spread or transmitted. Knowing this, clearly there must be a source of infection. Students, for our first activity, take a minute to think about 3 diseases that you know are infectious. Write them down on a sheet of paper. You may begin now.
Students, let's get ready. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.
Welcome back, students. I hope you were able to write down 3. Your answers may vary since there are many infectious diseases. Some common examples you may have listed could include typhoid fever, malaria, tuberculosis, or HIV. Do you know how those diseases are spread or transmitted? Take another few minutes to write down any information you know about how the diseases are spread.
Students, let's get ready. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.
Hello again, students. I am sure you made some valuable notes about each of your examples. Your answers may vary, but let us use the examples that I listed for Activity 1 to discuss. Typhoid fever is spread by people ingesting contaminated food or water. Malaria is spread when one is bitten by an infected female Anopheles mosquito. Tuberculosis is spread through the air when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or contaminates the air with tiny water droplets that contain living microorganisms. Finally, HIV is spread when a person comes in contact with an infected person's blood, semen, or vaginal fluid. When we complete this lesson, teacher will review your answers to make sure that the examples you wrote down are correct. The diseases that we just reviewed are caused by infectious microorganisms. The source of the microorganisms is called the Reservoir of Infection. This is the habitat in which the infectious microorganisms can develop and be transmitted. Reservoir of infection hosts include human beings, other animals, soil, water, food, contaminated objects, and the air. This means that any of these living organisms or substances in this list is capable of becoming a habitat for an infectious disease. The reservoir of infection is defined as any person, animal, plant, soil, or substance in which infectious agents normally live and multiply. The reservoir typically harbors the infectious agent without showing symptoms of the disease and serves as a source from which other individuals can be infected. People acting as the reservoir of infection are sometimes called the carriers of the disease. Let us now go through some examples of diseases that are transmitted by the different reservoir hosts that we listed. Human beings are the reservoir for many diseases, including the common cold and HIV. Animals, such as chickens, can spread the salmonella infection. Soil is the reservoir for tetanus, an infectious disease caused by infected wounds. Water is the reservoir for diseases like amoeba and cholera. Food is the reservoir for typhoid. Finally, air is the reservoir for diseases like pneumonia and tuberculosis. Now that we have looked at some examples of the reservoir of infection hosts, we are going to learn about how diseases are transmitted from the host. Transmission route is a term that describes the passing of an infectious disease from an infected host to an individual or group. Since there are many reservoirs of infection, there are several ways in which diseases can be transmitted. The first route of transmission we will discuss is droplet infection. Microorganisms are carried in tiny droplets through the air when an infected person coughs or sneezes. The droplets get inhaled by other people. Many respiratory diseases are transmitted in this way. Drinking contaminated water and eating contaminated food are the other routes. Microorganisms that are transmitted in this way typically infect an area in the gut. Direct contact is the route in which skin infections are transmitted. Direct contact with an infected person or contact with a surface covered with the organism will lead to infection. Organisms infecting sex organs are passed on through sexual intercourse. There are many sexually transmitted diseases, and they can be passed in different ways, including direct contact, saliva, and semen or vaginal fluids. Blood-to-blood contact is another route of transmission that passes along diseases, including many sexually transmitted diseases as well. Finally, the last route we will discuss is through animals. Diseases can be spread if you are bitten by an animal, exposed to or eat the meat of an infected animal. We have time for one last activity, students. Please name an example of a disease for each route of transmission. You may begin now.
Students, let's get ready. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.
Welcome back, students. How did you do? Not all of your answers will be the same, but let us look at a few examples of possible correct responses. Tuberculosis is spread by droplet infection. Amoebiasis is spread by drinking contaminated water. Salmonella is transmitted by food. Fungal infections, like ringworm, can be spread from direct contact. Gonorrhea is spread by sexual intercourse. HIV can be spread by blood contact. Rabies is transmitted by animals. How did you do? I am sure everyone was successful in completing this activity. Job well done, students. This brings us to the end of our time together. Today, we learned about the reservoir of infection. We discussed the possible hosts of infection and how the hosts transmit microorganisms. We also discussed the term route of transmission. Until next time, thank you, teacher. Thank you, students.